This is the jungle, an extreme environment in which everything and everyone's out to get you. An environment in which every mistake you make can be your last. My name is Dave, I'm a 28-year-old colonist, and this is the story of how I survived for 100 days in Rimworld, starting from scratch. I had no idea what happened or why I was here. All I could remember is I got out of what seems like an escape pod and opened my eyes. I was naked. I had no idea where I was, and I had no memories of the past. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't last for long in these conditions. I started by examining my surroundings. Traces of ancient civilization. Somebody must have lived here before me. I started by chopping wood to make a shelter, but it was too cold outside. And with nothing to cover me from the freezing temperature, I started to develop hypothermia. I had to find a solution and fast. I used some of the wood I chopped to build a campfire. This will keep me warm for the time being, but it wasn't a permanent fix. While I was covering from the cold, I started building a bed in the wooden door. This would offer me a secure shelter for the night. I was too focused on my work that I forgot the number one weakness of the human body: primal needs. I was getting hungry, so I stopped all my tasks to find something to eat. Luckily, there were some berry bushes close to me. Not what I would call a luxury meal, but it would have to do for the time being. And with that, I decided to call it a day, as I laid in bed for what was my first day in this place. Before I knew it was morning. I was starving, so I started by cutting some more berries. But with no experience in handling these plants, I would butcher some of the harvest. After having breakfast, I spent most of the day collecting wood to start building a proper house for me. The next day, I decided that I can't rely only on berry bushes to feed myself, so I decided to start my own farm. I made 2 growing zones, one for potatoes and one for rice. I was making good progress, but stress was building up within me, so I decided to build a little game for me to relieve some of it. Before I knew it, I was done planting my farm, so I continued working on my house, until a group of people passed by. They told me about my whereabouts, but with no memories of my hometown, I decided that I would stay here until I regain my memories. I immediately went back to my business. I hauled some berries back to my house and I continued chopping for wood that I would soon use to make some furniture. Useless as it might seem, this allowed me to improve my construction skill, allowing me to make more complicated stuff in the future. The night came in and as I was trying to sleep, I couldn't remove one thing of my mind. It was the group of visitors. They were holding weapons. I was lucky they were friendly, but what if they wanted to steal from me? I needed something to defend myself, and I needed it fast. So the next day, I immediately started working on a wooden club. Not the best weapon, but it was only for emergencies. After all, I was in no shape to fight. I would have to rely on other methods for protection. So I started building some traps near my base. I also needed some clothes, so I planted some cotton in my farm. It will take some time to grow, but it's the only solution I had. The rice on my farm was almost grown, so I had to work on building a storage for it. It had to be a cold space to keep the food from spoiling, so I decided to make a freezer. This also meant that I needed steel, and so I started digging for it. I was starting to think that surviving in this place was going to be a piece of cake, but nature will soon show me how naive I was. A mad buffalo started hunting me. I couldn't fight it. I had to lure it into my traps. It chased after me as I jumped the fences. As I was running from it, it sprang the first trap, and the second one, but it was still charging me, until... Luckily, the third trap was enough to take it down to its knees. After making sure it was unable to move, I approached it slowly before finishing it with my club. I immediately hauled its body to my house to start shopping it for me, and rearmed my traps, and continued mining for resources for my freezer. But soon I would realize that nature wasn't the only one that wanted me dead. I knew people would sooner or later come for me. I immediately started running to my base. I barely made it there before the raider. He was holding a sword. There was no way I win this fight, so I made it back behind my traps. He fell for it. A single trap was all it took to crack his legs. I took his clothes before finishing him with my club. They weren't the best fit, but they would have to do for now. After this, I continued to mine for steel. I built a generator before deciding to make a grave for the guy that raided me. He might have been an enemy, but he was a human being. Right after that, I finished making a cooler for my freezer. Now I can store my food, so I started harvesting the rice I grew. A good harvest. This would be good enough to fill my needs for quite some time. That night a storm struck and started a fire near my base, so I had to wake up to clear it. This would repeat the next night when a lightning strike hit my crops. The weather was also getting very hot, so I built a passive cooler. This wasn't going to protect me from the heat outside, but at least it'll help when I'm inside my house. I also built a research desk to make more complicated stuff in the future, and an electric stove to cook my food. After all, I can't afford to get food poisoning in these conditions. I also built a wall around my base to protect from people and animal invasions. And when I was hauling some items into my storage, a count from the Fallen Empire contacted me. He offered me a pack of glitterwood medicine, the best type of medicine that you can get in this world. In exchange, he would test a weather control weapon on an area near my base. So I accepted his offer, as this could save my life in a pinch. The weapon immediately started a storm that lasted for the next 5 days. Another buffalo turned mad and started hunting me, but the traps were enough to take care of it. My food reserves were getting better, and the traps were doing a good job of protecting me. The cotton grew up and it was time for harvest, and even though I got some clothes from the raider, they were not in the best condition. So I built a tailoring station and started sewing a parka for the winter, right before being raided by another faction. They had a bow this time. I can't afford to get shot, so I immediately started working on a wall to hide behind. But I didn't have any wood, so I got to chopping trees, and luckily I managed to finish the wall before their arrival. I got ready. I was going to ambush them as soon as they passed by me. The traps once again were enough to take care of the raider. He dropped the bow. It was in poor quality, but it would offer me a much needed range advantage over my opponents. I finished my parka and made a new pair of pants, since the old ones were getting tattered. I continued working like normal until out of nowhere I started feeling weak. I started vomiting and I felt pain like never before. It was food poisoning. I should pay more attention to how I cook my food. My consciousness started to fade and the pain was extreme. All I could do was get some rest for the time being. The next day I was feeling a little better, so I decided to keep my activity to a minimum and focus on researching until I get better. Time passed and I regained my strength. I glanced a couple of pigs running in my territory. I could hunt them for their meat, but I had a better idea. I should start my own animal pen, so I made a fence to hold them before chasing them with a rope. I managed to catch the first one and dragged him into the pen, right before doing the same to the second one. The next day I worked on improving my pen, but disaster always strikes when you least expect it. It was a simple walk back to my base, when I accidentally stepped into one of my traps. I had completely forgotten about. My right leg was severely hurt. I immediately made my way into my storage to fetch some glitterwood medicine. As I started bandaging myself and applying the medicine, the blood flew everywhere, until I managed to stop the bleeding. But I wasn't out of the wood yet, as this would also mean that I was in my most vulnerable state. I was going to spend most of my time in bed, only leaving it to grab some food and medicine every now and then. Days passed and thankfully nobody attacked me. My injuries were getting better, and even though I wasn't fully healed, I decided that it was time for me to start working again. I got some wood for my generator and tended to my base. The next days were calm, so I spent them working on my farm and my pen, and also spending whatever free time I had researching. I was learning how to survive in this world. I had food, shelter, and everything I needed. I even had a wild man named Clarence join me in my camp every now and then. Humans are social by nature, so having somebody to talk to kind of helped me relax. He would take some of my food, but I had plenty to spare. My pet animals were growing in number, so much in fact that he would drop some of the rice and potatoes from the fridge to help feed them. I finished researching batteries. This will help keep my food frozen in case of an emergency. Next into research was smithing. This would allow me to craft some armor and eventually make complex weapons. Equipment would occasionally break up, but with my skills in construction, I could easily fix them. Time passed by, and I continued to research until one night I heard animal cries in my pen. It was one of my pigs. She has given birth to a little piglet. I was so accustomed by this time to seeing lives taken away that seeing a new life given kind of comforted me. Winter has came, and the temperature outside were dropping. It was time to put on my pack. I eventually finished researching, but my base was getting cramped. I had to expand, and so I did. Next research subject would allow me to access the technology for making complex weaponry. As time passed, my relationship with Claro started to crumble. He liked to live as a free man, and didn't like to be ordered around. He started destroying my crops, so I wanted him to stop over and over and over again. But whenever I would stop looking, he would destroy more crops. I even asked him to leave, but he refused. He was a danger for my survival, so I made a plan to deal with him. I would wait until he falls asleep in the attack. A low blow for sure, but there was no place for morals here. An arrow landed, and I could tell he was surprised, but that didn't stop him from charging me. Thankfully, the arrow hit him in the leg, rendering it hard for him to chase me. A second arrow landed, this time on his right leg. I managed to get him down, but I couldn't finish him. As I was walking away, I noticed that he started bandaging his wounds. Afraid that he might seek revenge, I decided to finish my job. He was back on his feet. I took aim and I landed an arrow. He started running toward me. More arrows landed, but he was hungry for blood. Until he fell down, but this time I had to finish my job. He was no longer breathing. I killed him. I killed the only guy that was there for me in this cursed world, but it had to be done. It was either him or suffering from starvation. The least I can do now is give him a proper goodbye. I couldn't just dig a simple grave. I would make a proper place for him to rest. As the morning sun rose, I forced myself to continue my daily tasks. But soon after, another raid would take place. The raider was holding a knife, so I decided to stand close to my traps and shoot her. But the moment she stepped on the first trap, I realized this was no ordinary human. She charged through my traps with an extreme speed. I started running back, but then I couldn't hear her footsteps anymore. I turned back and she was dead. It was like she didn't feel pain at all. But what's this thing she was carrying? Go juice. I heard stories about this drug. It enhances your combat capabilities drastically, but it was extremely addicting. I would keep it in case of an emergency, but I had to be careful about using it. A young kid came to my doorstep asking for medicine to help his baby brother. I felt bad for him and I had more medicine than I needed, so I gave it to him. I didn't think about it at the time, but perhaps this was my way of seeking redemption for all what I have done. Meanwhile, my wood stock was getting low, so I decided to chop some trees. But that was when nature would once again show me her true self. I got an infection. The plague. This was an emergency. I took some medicine and I had to stop all my activities. This was no ordinary infection. It could take my life in an instant. I really needed to let my body rest. But when it rains, it pours. Another raid. I was feeling the pain of my sickness, but I had to force myself out of bed. One trap was all it took to get him to his knees. This one was only a kid. I couldn't bring myself to finish him. As I walked back to my bed, I heard the kid laughing. I didn't understand at the time, but soon I would start to see ashes coming through my window. A fire. It was only a matter of time before it catches up to me. And to add to that, another guy attacked me at the same time. He must have been with the kid. I was tired, but I had to get out of bed. A single trap took him out, and before I could even catch my breath, another raider came. This time, he was holding a gun. I immediately knew I was no match for him, and since I didn't have time to rearm my traps, I decided to reach for the go juice, but it was too late. I peeked to fire an arrow, but his gun was too powerful. A bullet managed to find its way into my frail body. Adrenaline started pumping, and I hid behind the wall. He attempted to rush me, but luckily a single trap took him out. The attacks were getting fierce. I bandaged my wounds and immediately went to fight the fire. I didn't have the energy to fight it. I thought I won't be able to turn it off. That was until... thunder. A storm was coming, just what I needed. The rain would take care of the fire, hopefully. I made it back to the shelter to take a much-needed rest. The next day, I realized that something was wrong with one of my pigs. Upon examining it, I found out that it has contracted the plague. I must have been careless and passed the infection to it. I immediately gave it the medicine and rested in bed. Time passed, and I got cured from my infection. But my pig wasn't so lucky, so I decided to butcher it to end its suffering. I started working on a helmet for extra protection, and then a herd of sheep passed by, so I decided to capture them and put them in the pen. The pen was getting bigger and bigger. This meant that my meat storage was also getting bigger. Traders would visit more often now. They were looking for good deals that would make them a profit. A transport boat crashed near my base. After checking it, I found that it was occupied by a traveler. I decided to offer my help. He said that his name was Cody. He was in an extreme condition, so I immediately hauled him inside before bandaging his wounds. This helped me improve my medical attributes. The next few days I would continue to take care of Cody, feeding him, giving him medicine, and cleaning after him. He was getting better each day. More mad buffaloes attacked my base, the animals in my pen gave birth to new generations, and people continued to attack me as well. So much in fact that I started getting careless, but that was my worst mistake. A lucky dodge allowed me to escape from the raider, as I found myself once again bleeding all over the place. I sprinted to my base and started bandaging to stop the bleeding. The floor was painted red. My improved medical skills were put to the test, until eventually the bleeding stopped. I immediately wiped the blood and went into bed to start my long recovery. Meanwhile, Cody eventually got better and left, and eventually my wounds got better as well, and I started working again. The pen animals were getting hungry, and the generator was running out of wood. All the rest I had, I would have to pay for now. Another transport pod landed near my base. It was holding a colonist that was in an extreme condition. I hauled him inside and started healing him. As he started to feel better, he offered to join my journey, but I refused. I couldn't trust anyone but myself anymore, so he left. I continued doing my daily tasks until I got hit by another raid, but this time it was not like the others. This time it was a group of 3 raiders. I was outnumbered. I had to reinforce my security and fast. I hauled some traps into the area in which I would trap them, and I got ready to fight. I shot at them, landing some of my shots, but it wasn't enough. Thankfully, the traps took 2 of the raiders down, leaving me in a 1v1 against the third one that decided to flee after what he saw. This could have easily turned really bad for me. I have to improve my defenses, so I spent most of my time researching. So much in fact that it was time to celebrate my 100 days survival in this world. So this is all I have to tell you about my story for the time being. I'll document the rest of my journey on a separate video. And if you didn't hear from me after this, well, chances are I'm most likely dead.